What's going on, world? Coming at you guys again with another quick video. White privilege. Let's talk about it. So I'm gonna catch a lot of slack for making this video, but the reality of the situation is I cannot not disclose information, especially when I have epiphanies. The reality of the situation is the African is the oldest life form or human being on the planet. All life started in Africa, which means that Africans have been on the planet longer than anybody else. And according to the genealogical and chronological record, white people are the newest. And there's a lot of controversy out there and conspiracy about where white people came from because nobody really knows. But as we sit here today in 2026 and we reflect on the fact that white people are the newest people on the planet, and it goes all the way back to African people. When we talk about white privilege, you really have to consider that and put that into context. With this whole Nolan Wells situation and Carmelo Anthony and Kendrick Johnson and so many other things, slavery, and so much just horrific and immoral actions that have happened against primarily people of color here in America. But, white people have been just at it. They've been at it in so many different countries all over the world. When you actually stop and think about it and reflect, I think the main reason why white people get so much slack is because their rise to safety, I'm not going to call it superiority, but safety, was done in a time to where so much was being documented and organized and classified and written down that it is so easy to point the finger at white people at being the bad guys without actually thinking about history within itself. Again, if the African is the oldest living human, that means that after the African, there was the Asian. After the Asian, then we had, Pacific Islander and Pacific Islander. Then we had like Filipino and was it Aboriginal Australian and Egyptian and, Indian and, then we had like Europe or like Native American. Then we had European. And we have Indigenous American, Mayan, Aztec, the whole nine, right? So, white people really started to come about when people started writing things in books. Before white people, we had civilizations, we had cities, we had epicenters, we had cultures and customs. It wasn't written down in a book. It was chiseled in stone and written in hieroglyphs and, other forms of communication passed down through oral traditions. But that's not to say that these civilizations and societies that were not white didn't practice the same immoral actions that we know white people to have done historically within the last couple hundred of years. So again, when we talk about white privilege, and I know I'm guilty of this because I've said it before that white males are the most violent people on the planet, because when you look at history, it clearly shows it. But when you actually think about it, the history that we know of is written history. What about all the history that happened before written history? We look at the Mayan and Aztec, and they were sacrificing babies and cutting heads off and doing all type of crazy shit. And they're still kind of doing that shit today down in Mexico. When we talk about cannibalism, you know, we still have cannibals all around the world. I know, not any personally, but I know I've done some research, and there's context out there that says that Asian people are the best uh, flavored human beings because of their diet, according to some cannibals. But when you really take this into consideration, you recognize and realize that people have been warring in Africa for generations, way before white people came in there. The so-called Native American here in America, with over 200 tribes, were warring with each other every year. When you go look at Asia, Korea had one of the longest and oldest forms of slavery in history, period. So when we take the time and actually consider this narrative that white people are the worst, it's primarily because they're the worst of what we know and what we've been tracking and what we've been categorizing and collecting since we've been utilizing paper. It's the same correlation and consideration now, right? When you look at, like, if you grew up in the 50s or the 60s or the 70s and you were rambunctious and you were a bit wild, a lot of the stuff that people did back then you got away with. Nowadays, when you look at technology, everybody has a cell phone, everybody's taking pictures, everybody's taking video. There's cameras on the stoplights, there's traffic cameras here and there. Like, that's what white people are kind of going through, right? White people started transitioning and solidifying themselves and trying to put themselves in a position for safety, ironically, about the same time what's going on right now, when people started writing and categorizing stuff. So when you go look at the history of the world, unfortunately, white people are really getting the short end of the stick because all of their actions are being written down. But before white people and all these negative actions in which have been categorized and listed and written down, I guarantee you all the rest of the cultures and people and races were practicing the same animalistic, immoral actions as what white people have been known to have done within the last couple hundred years. So, I mean, for me personally, it gives me pause and it gives me reflection because, like I said, my father's 110% white. And, I have a whole line of people before him that are white. But I'm also, other races and ethnicities, as well as black or African or Jewish. And so, foundational Black American, Native American, whatever you want to call it, right? Probably both. But the point is it's so easy to point the finger at people based off of the information that you know and information that you have. And it is very unfortunate that we find ourselves in this position today. So I want to take the time to reflect and to recognize that, yes, I am not giving a pass nor condoning the actions of white people against really people of color over the last couple hundred years. But before, white people did whatever they did to people of color and other people around the world, it's very likely that other people were doing the same, if not the own people doing the same to their own people as well. It's just the unfortunate reality that, we find ourselves now to where it's like a pyramid or a totem pole. Whoever's at the top is taking a piss. And if you're not at the top, you're getting pissed on. So, white people are at the top primarily, and, a lot of people are getting pissed on. And, when we look at the stuff that's happening In America, you see a lot of white people talking about how white births are down and jobs are coming up short, and that's why we started attacking DEI and all the rest of this stuff, right? Because the safety and security of white people is called into question, and it's primarily based on the premise of their actions over the last couple hundred years. And that's kind of unfair because before white people came into their position of privilege and security, other nations were practicing the same actions that white people have been categorized and classified as doing in an immoral fashion and action. Again, some people and some races are still doing it. So, again, I'm not giving a pass, but, I've said this before. The only path back to divinity is through unity. And, the reality of the situation is in the Bible, it teaches, he without sin cast the first stone. And as it stands right now, white people are the newest people on the block. And that block has been utilized and lived upon way before white people got here. And some of the actions, if not all of the actions that white people are known for, the people that were here before white people are very likely just as guilty. The only difference is, well, we've been able to document what white people have done, and we weren't able to document what everybody else has done. So this is a message to white America. This is the message to all my white people across the world. We love you, but we just want you to do better, right? Two wrongs don't make it right. And I understand you guys are still feeling yourself and you're trying to get yourselves ahead and keep yourself safe and secure so you don't end up like the dodo bird. But again, there's other ways to get your safety and security, because as it stands right now, we are all intelligent enough to work together and work with one another. And, we all have shortcomings. Nobody is perfect. This is why we need sympathy. This is why we need empathy. And this is why we need patience. And that goes full circle for everybody, not just white people, right? We all know that white people are some of the most aggressive, and they lack a lot of restraint. And this is why we know them to be the most daring and cunning and, experimental, because that's just how God made them. God made them to be the people. They're the breaker of chains, right? They do shit that nobody else could. And when you look at the history of white people, man, they have endured some shit. So, I give credit where credit is due. And, again, the path back to divinity is through unity. So, as we move forward collectively, we must take the time and have patience with one another. Because at the end of the day, two wrongs don't make a right. And it takes a collective in order to facilitate a form of unity. Because without unity, we are all simply beasts of the field. So give everybody the benefit of the doubt. Have some sympathy, have some empathy, have some patience, and learn from each other. This includes white people too, because white people do have a tendency to shrug things off and be very passive aggressive. I understand you guys are the new kids on the block, but the reality of the situation is you have to grow up sometime.